The South Pacific tries to stir as spring develops. I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, March 31st.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and like and subscribe. Ring the bell. You get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. To subscribe, you just hit the little Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you can. Hit the special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. All of them are longtime contributors. Our Predicament, Evolution Moto, Tim Caston, and Elliot Harris. Thank you all so much. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. We see remnants of a gale producing seas in the 15-foot range off of Southern California. Another gale with seas 23 feet pushing up into Alaska, not really doing a whole lot. And then some disturbed weather off the Kuril Islands doing absolutely nothing. But first off, let's take a look at current conditions. We're going to start in Northern California. The point ray is buoy 029. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy, all the way up from 33.3 second real long period energy, which honestly there isn't any. It says 0.1 or a tenth of a foot, but don't really expect that. Most of the energy is all right here in about the 10 to 11 second period range, with a whole bunch of short period energy below that. These numbers here are the size in feet of the waves at that particular energy band. So 3.8 feet at 10.5 seconds, 3.5 feet at 11 seconds. You get the idea. But it is the summation of all the energy near on both, we'll say both shoulders of a peak that put together. That's what makes the pure swell height for any given swell, and trying to ignore as much as possible the wind swell down below it. So, looking at that, we see primary swell 7.8 feet at 10.5 seconds from 307 degrees. That theoretically would make surf in about the 8-foot range, and it's probably in the 2-foot overhead range or so in Northern California. Also looking at the chop height, 3.6 feet from 312 degrees. That's all the energy from 2 to 5 second periods. That's even below this here. So that gives you a sense of how much warble and lump and just unrideable garbage there is in the water. If you're at 1 foot, you're doing good. 2 foot is kind of okay, but once you hit to 3 feet, it's pretty much just chop and makes things pretty ugly. All right, let's move on. Then we go to Southern California, the Point Loma South buoy off of San Diego, buoy number 191. We see a little bit more of something that looks like swell with a peak here at 13.3 seconds, 2.7 feet of energy right there. And then here's the shoulder energy here, and then we have that same wind swell component. All this being generated by a gale that was off the coast a day or two ago. Primary swell 5 feet at 12.7 seconds from 267 degrees, that getting through the Channel Islands pretty well down there. Surf from that, theoretically 6.4 feet, and there definitely are some waves that select breaks in Southern California if you can get away from the wind. Then there's also this secondary wind swell component, 4.3 feet at 9.5 seconds, again from the west, and making waves at theoretically in the 4-foot range, we'll say chest high. And the chop thing, 3 feet, so probably pretty raw. And finally, we go over to Hawaii, North Shore of Oahu, Waimea Bay, buoy number 106. Just looking at the graph, you can see not a whole lot going on. The highest peak, 1.3 feet at 12.5 seconds. That doesn't bode well. Primary swell, 2.1 feet at 13.1 seconds from 167 degrees. That's a little bit suspect. But the surf height, 2.7 feet. Yeah, it's probably waist high, something like that. Also note on this data here, you can see here is the projected surf height from the primary swell going back a couple of days. So you can sort of see trends if they are developing. Then all the raw data is buried down here. for about 2 days worth or so. So you can do some historical digging, or at least see what was going on in your session, maybe even the day before or the day before that. And speaking of that, let's go back and just take a look and see what was going on in the North Pacific Ocean. We're going back to Tuesday, the 26th of March. So, four plus days ago, this gale developed here, and this is really the one we're focusing on. There was a gale off of Japan here, but it was pretty much garbage. There was this gale that developed off of, we'll call it the Pacific Northwest, with 24.8 foot seas. These are the highest seas over this entire domain. You can see a little plus sign right there. See the plus there. And max winds were 40 knots in that gale right there. We'll put this into motion on Wednesday. The gale kind of held together with 23-foot seas on Wednesday, then weakened, but you can see additional fetch tried to build in behind as we got into Friday, the 29th of March, producing 22-foot, maybe almost, 22.9 foot seas on Friday evening. That swell has already hit into Northern California, and then the gale worked its way south on Saturday off of Point Conception, pushing swell into Southern California. And here we are on Sunday. The gale has faded. The swell is hitting Southern California, and also with rain and wind and some weather down there as well, while things are drying out here in Northern California. Then we're also going to go back in time just a little bit here to Saturday. A little gale developed here in the northwestern Gulf of Alaska, but you can see the gale was pushing due northeast. Most of the swell energy from that is going to push into Alaska and British Columbia, and maybe just the faintest remnants of energy will reach into Hawaii and the California coast, but for the most part, not really of interest. Then we're also going to look down south here. Australia right here, New Zealand right here. There's Australia. The gale developed south of New Zealand on Wednesday, the 20th of March, producing 32-foot seas just barely for a short period of time. Now notice the gale was almost falling southeast. All energy pushing off to the east. Very little of this has reached up into California. Whatever there is hitting now, and it's really quite minor. But then another gale developed right here on Friday, the 22nd of March, so a little over a week ago, producing barely 30-foot seas and not even in the Northern California swell window, but certainly in the Southern California swell window. Swell from this system is hitting Southern California as we speak now. A lot of it lost under the local gale wind swell, and certainly that Australia or the New Zealand swell, it completely lost underneath all the local bump and chop and whatever and wind swell. So two systems didn't really make much of an impact, but we're letting you know that the Southern Hemi is at least trying and will figure perhaps more prominently as we start moving forward. So let's look forward. We're going to start by looking at the jet stream. These are winds up at about 30,000 feet. These winds help produce gales, and when those gales form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet. We see one right there. In fact, the jet is very weakly consolidated, pushing off Japan, winds to 170 knots or so here. But then the jet just sort of splits, falls apart almost as soon as it gets really cleanly into the North Pacific. It does make a little trough here off the, we'll call it the northwestern Gulf. But you see the jet pushing way up high here and split. This is a ridge that supports high pressure down at the ocean surface in between the two jet stream flows. Then you got this backdoor trough right here. What troughs do is create a counterclockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure. So perhaps low pressure there. And low pressure, of course, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, get traction on the ocean surface, impart energy into the ocean, creating swell, and swell as it radiates away from the fetch area. The shorter period elements die off, exposing longer period swell, and of course when that swell hits your beach, it creates surf. So we do have a backdoor trough here. That's what's supporting the low pressure system off of Southern California. It has also produced some rain and some snow up in the Sierra, and colder air because it's over Alaska and Canada drags cold air down with it. So So it has given us a little bit of a push, a little bit of a feel, at least in the Sierra, like it's still winter, though down at lower levels at near sea level, it definitely feels like spring. All right, so we put this into motion now. As we get into Monday, the backdoor trough over California starts moving inland. The trough here in the northwestern Gulf just really doesn't look particularly strong, and you can see this big split pattern continuing, likely supporting high pressure. Another little trough tries to set up late Tuesday into Wednesday. Looks like another backdoor trough setup, pushing down the, we'll call it the Pacific Northwest. Thursday, look at how far the jet is split. Well, by Thursday, the 4th of April, the whole way back to a point south of Japan. This is just very much smells of the inactive phase of the MJO. Anyway, when you get the inactive phase, it does steal energy from the jet stream, but then it allows the jet to split, and eventually whatever splits has to come back together, and you get these backdoor troughs that tend to push down California, and by late Thursday, you see pushing into northern California, with the jet coming onshore somewhere over northern Baja, and then into southern California later Friday. Potential for weather there. That's really what we're looking at. And yet another one forecast as we get into Saturday, the 6th of April, looking to do the same thing, pushing right in as we get into Sunday. That's a week out and maybe more weather. But from a surf perspective, nothing super obvious is in the jet stream. So let's go down to the surface. Surface level pressure, surface level winds. You can see weak low pressure right off of Point Conception here. High pressure, 1028 millibars, filling the Gulf of Alaska. Another high pressure system out over the dateline, and really nothing else. We know there's a trough right here, and you can see like weak low pressure, but most of it's over Alaska, not really getting any traction. So we get into Monday, the low pressure over California fades out. But look at this, a new system starts building off of the Kuril Islands with 50 knot the southwest winds. Here we go, 55, maybe even 60 knot west winds wrapping around this low Monday evening, but lifting very fast to the north and approaching the West Aleutian Islands as we get into Tuesday morning, and then up into the Bering Sea after that. Well, look at this. Strong high pressure, 1048 millibars, just bulletproof, setting up north of Hawaii, driving trades at 30 knots. Hawaii's down here, so this is more like an open ocean chop, if anything else. Maybe sideband energy working its way down into the Hawaiian Islands. As we get into Wednesday, that fetch expands as the high pressure still lock solid, 1048 millibars, filling the Gulf of Alaska, driving east trades over the Hawaiian Islands and east wind swell. This is pretty much a typical springtime sort of pattern, but not having, at least for the moment, too giant of an impact along the California coast. Thursday, you don't see it, but you get the sense, well, there's some little low pressure right there. We know there's a trough starting to build out here, and that's sort of holding the northwest winds at bay relative to California, but Hawaii just getting hammered with 20 to 25 knot easterly trades. So we get into Thursday, the front falls down the coast. You can't even really see it. 25 knot northwest winds off of California. Trades continue for the Hawaiian Islands. Now, a new little low is forecast building here off the Kuril Islands as we get into Friday with 45 knot west winds. That's going to take pretty good aim at the U.S. West Coast, but kind of bypassing Hawaii. So we get into Saturday, that low continues with 45 knot east winds, light wind regime for California, trades still strong for the Hawaiian Islands. Then as we get into Sunday, the low pushes into the Gulf, fading with 30 knot winds. It's a good opportunity for some swell production from that, and certainly wind swell relative to the Hawaiian Islands, and a lighter wind regime for California. All right, so what's the effect of those winds on the ocean surface? We're looking at the wave model. Significant wave heights, the highest 1/3 of raw seas produced by these winds. So as we get into Monday, well, not a whole lot goes on, but we know there's a low forecast off the Kuril Islands. It starts building with 34.8-foot seas on Monday afternoon, building to 42 feet. By Tuesday morning, 44.5 feet. Now, a lot of this energy is going to be pushing off to the north, but some off to the east because we saw 55-knot west winds there. And as long as it stays, the fetch stays, or whatever beach over here is south of the line from the core of the fetch, south of the Aleutian Islands, and into wherever your target is here in the U.S. West Coast. Maybe some sideband energy for Hawaii. But as we get into Tuesday afternoon, the low fully in the Bering Sea, and that's pretty much it for that. Now, as we get into Thursday, another low is forecast building here west of the dateline, and by Friday, theoretically 27-foot seas building to 33-foot Friday night. And again up to 36 feet Friday night, and south of that low point in the Aleutian. So theoretically an area somewhere in here is a target, maybe some sideband energy down into Hawaii. And Saturday the low continues off to the east, fading with seas at 29 feet late Saturday, and by early Sunday pretty much gone as it moves into the northern Gulf of Alaska. And there we are 180 hours out. So two things to watch. The gale here, that's, not till almost next weekend, and the other gale off the Kuril Islands in the next day or two. Now, we hinted that springtime is coming, and with that, we start looking south. Yes, there are seas in the southern hemisphere, in the deep south-central Pacific at 24 feet. I mean, yes, it's possible some swell could result. Maybe for California, probably not for Hawaii. All this is a line due west to east, so whatever swell is generated by this, probably targeting Chile and Peru and maybe up into Central America. Not so much for California. Watch this low here falling due south too. That suggests that the jet is falling south and not pushing up to the northeast. As we get a little bit deeper into the season, when the North Pacific pretty much shuts down, we'll flip over and start looking at the jet stream for the southern hemi. But right now, we're not in a great shape for that. The good news is, though, as we get into Wednesday, a gale is forecast building in the moderately deep south central Pacific with 27-foot seas building to 32 feet. As we get into late Wednesday, 34 feet. And look at this, sort of pushing off to the northeast, 35-foot seas Wednesday night, and then fading as we get into Thursday, well in the California swell window. And let's even take this as far back as we can get it. Yeah, Hawaii's at 158. So theoretically, even some sideband energy up into the Hawaiian Islands from that. Then we continue going out. We see some energy trying to develop south of New Zealand as we get into Saturday and Sunday, 26 or 28. Yeah, earlier today, the models had shown 30-foot seas under here, but even that's fading. My guess is by the time it actually comes time for the system to form, we won't even get that. The predominant, you can just see it, the pattern seems to be running flat west to east over the south-central Pacific. During El Nino years, one would expect the area under New Zealand to really be dominant, but this El Nino has been a weird one, not as strong as forecast. The PDO is interacting with that. I've been promising to make a video on the PDO, and I think how we're going to do this somewhere over the next couple weeks. I'll put it together. But it'll be a video that focuses on the PDO, the retrospective look at this El Nino, how the two of them collided to not produce an El Nino as strong as was expected. And we'll look at some hard numbers to sort of bear out that thought. Though I think anybody that surfs in the Pacific Ocean knows that this winter was not as productive as we would have hoped for. All right, so let's go take a look at local wind forecasts. California here, Hawaii out here. We have high pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, low pressure over California. Not too bad of a wind pattern, at least in Northern California, but Southern California is getting some pretty good south winds and rain. Take what you can get, make the most of it, because at some point we're going to be fully rolling into summer here, and it's all going to dry up. So we get into Monday, this sort of, we'll call it 10-knot north winds for California. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. So you get into Tuesday, even a lighter wind regime for California. But here comes that strong high pressure system. Trades starting to ramp up 20 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. As we get into Wednesday, 20 to 25 knots. And that's just sort of steady state. This is not gusts. You can see up to 35 knots well north of Hawaii, but not aimed at the islands. Northwest winds 15 knots for California. As we get into Thursday, just the influence of the high just dominates. North winds off of California, even 15 to 20 knots along the coast. Trades 25 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Friday, the high, the leading edge of the high tries to ridge in, but you see low pressure just holding from a backdoor trough over California, so maybe not as bad as it looks here. 25 knot trades for the Hawaiian Islands. So Saturday, everything clears out for California. Northwest winds 10 knots. Things starting to fade a little bit as the high falls to 1036 millibars instead of, what was it, 1046 or something. East winds at 20 knots. And then we get into Sunday, again, a relatively light wind regime for California, and trades at a more modest 20 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. And then precip and or snow for California. Well, here's California. Here's Southern California down here. The model shows rain. It is raining in Southern California down towards Orange County, if anywhere, and that is supposed to be fading. Some snow in the Sierra, theoretically this evening, but that fading out pretty quick. As we get into Monday, here's the high pressure pattern, not a drop of precipitation forecast into Tuesday. Then, well, late Wednesday, maybe some showers for the Cape Mendocino region, maybe down into the Sierra. And then as we get into Thursday, one senses, though it's not really clear here, we'll call it an upper level low because it's not really manifesting itself at the surface. Snow starting to develop for Tahoe on Thursday morning. Rain down the coast to almost Point Conception and building, but not anything particularly strong. It's more like clouds and showers relative to anywhere but the Sierra. Sierra continuing to get some snow, and that also Friday, low gets a little bit more defined. Stronger odds for rain, mainly along the coast of California, the whole way into Southern California. Snow for the Sierra, and then as we get into Saturday, that starts fading out. Lingering snow showers for the Sierra. Maybe another little pulse on Sunday, but my guess is if this even materializes, this is more like a couple of little showers and some clouds and not really rain. And there we go. Last lingering snow showers over the Sierra a week out. Checking snow forecast, we'll start at Palisades, Tahoe, formerly Squaw Valley. Yeah, we're seeing accumulations of up to theoretically 2 feet. That's probably a little bit on the high side because temperatures, well, we'll see. You see just little bits. What's that? The 4th, that's Wednesday night, and a little bit dribbling through even into the weekend, flattening out. Let's go check another resort. Kirkwood doing about the same. We'll call that 17 or 18 inches. Now, all these systems are moving north to south, so the first thing they hit in terms of elevation is Tahoe. That wrings out some of the moisture, and the further south down the Sierra they go, the more they get wrung out. And so by the time you reach Mammoth, we're down to 5 or 6 inches total. And then we look at the freeze level. This is the real indicator for the incoming or inbound spring pattern setting up. So today up in the Sierra, the freeze level, how to read this. So this is the base of Palisades, Tahoe at about 6,200 feet. This is the summit up at the top of the Palisades and Granite Chief at about 9,000 feet. Reds would be if there's precipitation. These are above freezing temperatures. Gray would be capable of producing sleet. The line between the white and the gray is the 32-degree freeze line. and then the blue is 28 degrees. That is more, if there's moisture present, better for producing snow. So you can see as we get into even later today, temperatures, the freeze level up to 6,500 feet. And as we get into Monday, April 1st, no joke here, freeze levels up to 11,000 or 11,005, something like that. So pretty warm, continuing into the second, and then boom, the whole thing just falls apart as that trough theoretically starts building over California, sinking south, with the freeze level down to 4,000 feet or almost 3,500 feet on the 4th. So what's that? That's Thursday, Friday, Saturday into Sunday, and then boom, here we go, right back up into this big warm spot as we go into the week beyond that, back at 11,000 foot freeze level. So spring always characterized by this warming, cooling, warming pattern. Then as you get deeper into spring, it just starts staying warm all the time. And from a snow perspective, I mean, that's not bad. You know, you can get corn snow, and corn snow is great for skiing, especially if you have a decent sized base. And the base right now at Palisades Tahoe and most of the Tahoe ski resorts is right at about 100% of normal, give or take, 10 inches one way or the other. All right, so let's go take a look at surf forecast. We're going to start in Northern California, Ocean Beach, San Francisco. Surf heights in the 7 foot, but you see these dropouts. I mean, that suggests there's a good amount of wind swell intermixed with all that. Anyways, you get into Monday, that starts dropping off. Tuesday, a little bit of swell arrives. That's from one of the gales that pushed off up into the northern Gulf. Surf heights in the 5 foot range. Tuesday, fading into Wednesday, and then here you go with these dropouts, again suggesting wind swell. And you can look down here, 20 knot northwest winds blowing. Surf heights up to maybe 9 feet on Friday. We'll see about that. But then again, you got these dropouts everywhere. Most of this probably wind swell. And then continuing on, we got 30 knot north winds or northwest winds forecast as we get into Sunday a week from now. So definitely a windy kind of pattern. Swell sizes 7 feet at 10 seconds into Monday and falling from there. So pretty much wind swell. A little bit of background swell, 3.8 feet at 13 seconds for Tuesday. That's slowly fading off. And then you got this jumbled up and down thing with periods in the 11-second period range. So local wind swell mainly from winds off the coast, and more of that same with periods dropping to the 9-second period range as we get into Sunday. Let's go look at Southern California. Pick data point at random here. Again, that wind swell generated by the local gale off the coast fading as we get into Monday. Surf size is in the 1.5 foot range and jumping around, so even that might be optimistic. Pretty much holding on through the end of the model. Wind speeds, not too bad until you get into Friday, Saturday, and then west winds at 20 knots, another front pushing through. Swell sizes, well, 3.8 feet at 10 seconds, probably bigger than that even today. Getting into Monday, that swell starts dropping off 2 feet at 7 seconds with some other 1.2 feet at 12 seconds intermixed. And you pretty much get through where it's all in the 1 foot at 12 to 13 second periods. So nothing too exciting there. Then we go over to Oahu. Surf is not that big today, 2.9 feet. Wave size, so waist high, maybe building some as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, but then you get the sense that's all wind swell because it all drops off. And once you don't have any quote unquote ground swell, this chart doesn't handle it very well. Let's go take a look. Oh, and you can see the trades here too, 20, 25 knots, 28 knots, and that's steady state winds with gusts higher than that, all trades. Swell size, 2.6, 3, 4 feet into Wednesday at 11 seconds, coming from the northwest and then dropping off, and just really not a whole lot going on. All right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation? These two oscillations are the major influencers of weather in the North and South Pacific, depending on their configuration. We're going to start by looking for signs of the MJO. Two phases to the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. There's the active phase and the inactive phase. The active phase is like a low-pressure system. It is the good phase. When it moves over the Pacific, it helps feed energy into the jet stream, consolidating the jet stream and making it more capable of building troughs and therefore supporting gale development. The MJO, both the active and the inactive phase, travel around the planet on the equator from west to east. The active phase on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other side. The active phase, when it starts pushing over the West Pacific, takes anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to make its journey across the Pacific. When it does that, it imparts energy to the jet stream, which feeds the storm track, which generally makes things favorable for storm development. Likewise, when the inactive phase is pushing over the Pacific, it too takes about 4 to 6 weeks to make the track across the Pacific. But because it's more like a high-pressure system, it steals energy from the jet stream splits, and you end up exactly how we are right now. The good news about a split jet stream in the winter is it's conducive to supporting those backdoor troughs that push down the California coast. So like the big winter, not this winter, but the winter before that when we got all those storms, that was a combination of a very strong building El Nino, but at the surface, a inactive, almost a La Nina pattern, persistently keeping the jet split, but ushering in backdoor trough after backdoor trough, hence lots of snowfall and rain. All right, so today, though, we're going to look at trade winds. The active phase of the MJO, because it's a low pressure system, it can also dampen trade winds on the equator. So we're looking at data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator. This is the East Pacific here. This is the West Pacific here. This is the equator. This is roughly a point, somewhere south of Mexico, and there is New Guinea. So this is the far West Pacific, and the date line's right about there. We're just looking at the arrows. There's wind sensors on the buoys, these TAO buoys, and we get a 5-day average wind speed. We see winds pretty light out of the east. We're just looking at the direction of the arrow and the strength of the arrow. Pretty weak out of the east and the East Pacific, but then building a little bit stronger here, maybe south of Hawaii, weakening some, but then moderate to strong west over the West Pacific. But it is not the actual wind speeds that matter. It is the difference for this time of year. Winds around the spring, tend to blow pretty hard. If you live in Hawaii, you know that's the time for probably the strongest trades. If you live in California, you know the springtime is the time for the dreaded northwest winds and all the upwelling that comes with that. That tends to be more pronounced during La Nina, less pronounced during El Nino. So we're kind of hoping the northwest winds don't really blow in California and that the water temperatures at least stay somewhat reasonable rather than dropping down to extreme colds like they did last spring. All right, so anyway, looking at the wind anomalies, we see some arrows out of the west. So because the trades are so light, it's the equivalent of a light westerly wind anomaly pattern here on the equator. We get to the Central Pacific, pretty much dead neutral. We get to the West Pacific, light out of the east. So this suggests certainly not El Nino, certainly not the active phase of the MJO, because if the active phase were in play, trades would be reversed or at least pretty calm. If anything, this suggests maybe the active phase is over here somewhere with these light west anomalies, and the inactive phase, the high pressure, not good for the jet stream pattern, starting to build over the West Pacific. So let's look at the forecast for the next 2 weeks. Okay, this is the east-west component of the wind, the blues, easterly anomalies, roughly associated with the inactive phase of the MJO. The reds and oranges, westerly anomalies, associated with the active phase of the MJO. So back in March, this is for the whole planet, too. So the date line runs right up the middle. All we care about is what's going on in the Pacific, and specifically the West Pacific. That's where the active phase and the inactive phase have their biggest influence over the jet stream. So West Pacific starts at about 125 east, so right here. So from here to about 170 west, right here. That's all we're looking. If you go down here, blue, blue, blue in early March, inactive phase of the MJO. Here comes the reds, westerly anomalies, traversing the Pacific. You see that just like that? And that was from, we'll say, mid-March over the date line in about the end of March, and now south of California. No surprise that we're maybe getting the backdoor troughs pushing down the California coast, because you have the inactive phase of the MJO here, the blues building in the West Pacific, splitting the jet stream. The active phase, or lingering remnants of it south of California, drawing the jet stream back to the equator and giving us at least what the westerly anomalies, what they really help do is support gale formation. So that's probably a bit of a component with the gale off the California coast currently, and Hawaii being locked down by high pressure because they're out here. So here's where we are today. You can see it. High pressure or easterly anomalies, inactive phase of the MJO building over the West Pacific as the active phase exit over the East Pacific. Inactive phase of the MJO is supposed to hold into about the 5th of April, so what, maybe just a week or so. Still working its way across south of California at the end of the model run. That's 2 weeks from now, April 16th. But you see, here come westerly anomalies, and maybe the active phase of the MJO setting up, we'll say 2 weeks from now, about mid-April. Let's go keep digging. All right, here's another component of the MJO, cloud cover. If the inactive phase of the MJO is high pressure, well, high pressure typically does not support the formation of clouds. It is falling air, clear skies. The active phase of the MJO is a low pressure system, so it creates lifting air, taking warm, moist air, lifting it, hoisting it up into the atmosphere. That warm, moist air hits cold air aloft up at the jet stream level, condenses into the form of clouds. So this is a model. It's called outgoing long wave radiation, but we can just call it potential for cloud cover. So here's South America, Central America, Hawaii. EQ is the equator, date lines right there. The yellows and oranges are more sunlight reflecting off the ocean surface, outgoing long wave radiation. So that would mean clear skies. That would mean the inactive phase of the MJO. That's today. And this is a statistic model. 5 days from now, inactive phase still in control of the West Pacific. 10 days from now, same deal. But then you see the building active phase of the MJO developing over the maritime continent, trying to ease into the West Pacific 15 days from now. So maybe 2 weeks from now, according to this model, that's when the active phase might start having an influence on the West Pacific. Now keep in mind, this is a statistic model. The dynamic model here paints a little bit different picture, with the inactive phase moving off to the east pretty good only 10 days from now, and the active phase moving fully in control of the West Pacific 2 weeks from now. So a little bit different perspective depending on which model you look at. Let's dig deeper still. Here are phase diagrams for the same two models. This is the statistic model here, the dynamic model here. How do you read this thing? Well, the MJO moves from west to east. The active phase is what this is tracking. From the Indian Ocean over the maritime continent to the West Pacific, right where we want it, to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. The heavy dot is where the active phase is today. So somewhere in Africa, maybe trying to almost make its way into the Indian Ocean. And the further this heavy dot is away from this circle, the stronger the active phase is. So very weak. You can see back here in the 17th, 18th, 19th of March, we had a strong active phase pushing across the West Pacific. Now we're in the exact opposite pace. The statistic model suggests the active phase 1, 2, 3 different tracks, but all of them ending up more or less over the maritime continent 2 weeks from now, and extremely weak with the forecast tracks inside the cone of silence. The dynamic model suggesting the active phase moving a bit quicker, almost into the West Pacific 2 weeks from now, but pretty weak as well. This is the upper level moisture forecast going out 40 days. Reds, dry air, greens, wet air. 5 days per panel, 8 different panels. South America, Central America, New Guinea there, the equator right there, the date line right there. Reds and yellows suggest dry air, suggesting, and this runs about a week ahead of what's actually going on at the surface. This is upper level, like jet stream level. So dry air, inactive phase in control now, slowly fading into about the 15th of April, and then the active phase, wet air, start pushing into the Pacific the whole way through the end of April into the early part of May. So the next opportunity for any reasonable surf potential is probably about 2 weeks off, according to this model. Then we go take a look at the CFS model. Now this one goes out a month, but it's a little bit more defined. The blues are easterly anomalies, the reds are westerly anomalies, but it also shows the MJO, the phase, this black contour here. Dotted contours are the inactive phase of the MJO, and you can see it real plain here. The blues, easterly anomalies associated with the inactive phase. A solid active phase of the MJO here. This is back in early January, mid-January into early February with strong westerly anomalies. And then another inactive phase in February into the early part of March with easterly anomalies. The active phase of the MJO in the middle of March to the end of March, the last of its westerly anomalies. Well, California's at about 120, something like that. So you can see south of California on the equator. Then here comes our inactive phase starting to develop now. Forecasts for the next 2 weeks with westerly or with easterly anomalies in control, but even after it fades, see there, a weak active phase forecast, but easterly anomalies in control. So that's kind of a little bit of a mixed view. Let's keep digging. And then finally, the CFS model going out 3 months. Of course, it's hard to believe a model going out a week, going out 3 months. It's a wild guess, but it sort of paints a little bit of picture of what's going on at the El Nino level. But first let's get ourselves oriented. Now, past performances in the bottom, the forecast is the top. Oranges and reds are or yellows and oranges are westerly anomalies associated with the active phase. And here's the date line right up here. Far West Pacific starts at 120 east or 125 east, so right there. So this is the area of this chart we're interested in. Westerly anomalies back in December, active phase of the MJO. Another strong active phase in late January and February. Our current active phase all but gone, fading south of California with easterly anomalies forecast into about April 14th or so. Then after that, steady westerly anomalies. Right, let's overlay the MJO, see if our guess is right. It's solid contours of the active phase of the MJO. So here's our current active phase fading out, and you can see it literally working. It's the whole way across the planet from 0, which is England roughly, the whole way over the date line in the Pacific back to England. Inactive phase with its easterly anomalies forecast now into maybe only about April 12th or 13th. Then the next active phase sets up with westerly anomalies from, we'll say, April 10th through about first May 2nd or something like that. So this would be a good target here for swell production. Inactive phase forecast after that, but notice westerly anomalies holding. Don't know if I believe any of this here. Now here's the really not good, I'll just say scary part or depressing part of this model. It's the low pass filter. It shows you where El Nino and La Nina are. And so here it is. The black is a low pressure bias. So this would be your El Nino indicator, because El Nino is effectively a tendency towards low pressure in the Pacific. And you can see we had 4 contours, and this was centered near the date line, about 165 west, so almost north of Hawaii, somewhere between Hawaii and the date line, through January 11th. Then we went down to 3 contours on March 13th or so. We're down to 2 contours now, and the second contour is supposed to fade in the next week. And then as we get into May, the end of May, the last of the El Nino effect roughly down on the surface completely fades out and then transitions over into the maritime continent. So this would be a transition from El Nino in the Pacific to, it's not showing it yet, but at some point you're going to start seeing some dotted lines here. That would be a high pressure bias over the Pacific as low pressure sets up into the Indian Ocean. So the transition from El Nino to La Nina. Not encouraging to see this, but we all know it's coming. It's now on the model. All right, so now let's go into the El Nino, or the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation portion of the long-range forecast. We're going to start looking subsurface. Are there any signs of El Nino or La Nina in the ocean, down below the ocean surface? We're looking at data from the TAO buoy array again. Those buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. These little lines of X's here, these are the anchor lines on the buoys. The X's are the sensors. Use to measure subsurface water temperature and use a model to fill in the gaps. We're looking for the presence of Kelvin waves and or the balance of warm water in the Pacific. During La Nina, you have colder water in the east, warmer water in the west, all driven there by stronger than average trades, pushing any warm water that develops in the East Pacific off to the west. During El Nino, you get active phases of the MJO that produce westerly anomalies that take warm water that's here in the west, start pushing it off to the east in little balls, known as a Kelvin wave. A ball of warm water takes about 3 months to make the trek from the West Pacific to the East Pacific, eventually impacts the Galapagos and Ecuador, gurgles up to the ocean surface, creates a warm pool here. Like the last El Nino, we had 8 or even 9 Kelvin waves that were produced resulting in a pretty good pool of warm water here in the East Pacific where it normally is not present. That creates evaporation, that changes the jet stream pattern, theoretically feeds more energy into the jet stream, creating more storms and surf, and you know the drill from there. All right, so looking at the data, we're looking at the 30-degree isotherm is completely gone. It was here. That's 30 degrees centigrade. The 29-degree isotherm, it was at 175 west last week. Now moving steadily east, suggesting trades are already driving warm water from El Nino off to the west. 28-degree isotherm, very shallow, suggesting just surface warming of the ocean right here by sunlight and nothing more than that, and warm water getting displaced here into the West Pacific. And the 24-degree isotherm doing pretty much the same thing, looking like at least a standard normal kind of configuration with less warm water in the east and more warm water in the west. But it is not the actual temperature, it is the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. And what you see here is just a massive pool of cold water, 6 degrees centigrade below normal, trying to work its way off to these cold water, completely filling the main corridor here where Kelvin waves would normally travel. This is effectively a cold water Kelvin wave. The last of El Nino's warm water at 1, 2, maybe 3 degrees above normal. It's maybe more attributable just to the active phase of the MJO over the West Pacific, dampening trade winds, allowing sunlight to warm up these ocean waters temporarily. But as soon as the active phase moves off in a week or two, this will all get wiped out, and yet even provide more of an opportunity for this cold water to eventually start leaching up to the ocean surface. Another view of that from Pentad data uses the same buoy data but also satellite data, paints an even grimmer picture. Colder water already erupting off of Ecuador. The pool, though, not quite as large down here as what the other chart suggested there. So a little bit of a disparity here. And the last of the warm surface water from El Nino getting pushed off to the west. Pentad sea level anomaly data, it's satellite data. You use a satellite, you figure out, is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? Strip out the waves, the wind waves, the tides. And why does that matter? Well, if you have cold water at depth, cold water contracts. When you do that, it creates a dip on the ocean surface. That is, the water above the cold water pool collapses some. The opposite is if you have warm water depth, it expands, it displaces warm water above it, and it'll create a bump on the ocean surface. All right, so using the satellite data, here's Chile, Peru, Ecuador, the Galapagos right there, Central America, Hawaii, equator there, dateline there, New Guinea out here, -5, -10 centimeters. This is not degrees, this is centimeters. A depression on the ocean surface off of Ecuador, going the whole way out to a point about south of California at 10 centimeters, maybe even a little bit more, and then -5 centimeter anomalies the whole way to New Guinea. All this suggests nothing but cold water at depth across the equatorial Pacific. No hope for any development of warm water pushing east. Next up, upper ocean heat anomalies. Upper 300 meters of the ocean surface. This is the West Pacific here. This is the East Pacific here. This is going back a year, so April of last year. Lots of warm water in the West Pacific, but you could already see there's actually Kelvin wave, warm water pushing east. One, there's actually number 2. Or maybe number 3, number 4, actually it might be more than that. But you can see the movement of the Kelvin waves and the balance of warm water moving from West Pacific to East Pacific. More Kelvin waves in August, October, November, and there's a last little one in December. And then here we got to the end of February, and the last of the warm water subsurface in the East Pacific gone, and you see the building cool anomalies subsurface working their way across the Pacific, waiting for their opportunity to jump to the surface or erupt to the surface. Sea surface temperature anomalies, all right? Now, we see all that cold water at depth subsurface. But at the surface, the oranges and reds are above normal temperatures. That's even adjusted for the steadily rising temperatures of our oceans. So Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Galapagos Islands, Central America, you get it. Equator, roughly right here. We see a little patch of cooling off of Ecuador. There was another patch out here somewhere, but that's dissipated. We see warming temperatures right along the equator and looking pretty nice. But again, we know the active phase of the MJO is moving over this area. We also know that whatever warm water is left subsurface-wise is getting squeezed to the surface by much cold water at depth. So a combination of the two has resulted in this rather El Nino-ish looking signal here still as we get into the 30th of March across the equatorial Pacific. But we know what's going on subsurface, and we know that this warm pattern is probably very short-lived. Here's the 7-day trend. Yeah, we see cooling off of Ecuador right here, but then warming out over across the rest of the Pacific, but over a very thin little line here. And we suspect this is not going to last very long, maybe another week or something like that, and then you're going to see the emergence of more of this blue cooling. But for now, looking at the overall picture, it still looks like El Nino, at least for the moment. Also notice the very warm temperatures out here in what they call the main development region in the Atlantic. Hurricanes, tropical waves push off Africa over the Cape Verde Islands there. They tap this warm pool, and if it's above, I think it's 81 degrees Fahrenheit, that really supports storm development. Right now, with a transition, we think, towards La Nina as we get into August and September, this area could become quite active. The CDAS Nino 1.2 index, this is temperatures in the Nino 1.2 region right there off of Ecuador and by the Galapagos. No big surprise. Temperatures falling today at -0.5 degree, 545 thousandths of a degree, and have been falling steady since the first week in March with the collapse of El Nino. But the official El Nino region, the Nino 3.4 region, this is on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, from point south of California out to about the dateline, really holding up pretty well with values 1.185 degrees above normal. Again, if you're below 0.5 degree to above 0.5 degree, that's considered normal. 0.5 degree to 1 degree for like 3 consecutive 5 months periods is considered weak El Nino. 1 to 1.5 degrees is moderate El Nino, which is probably about where we are now. And at one point, we were up into the 2 degree range. So 1.5 to 2 degrees is strong El Nino. Above 2 degrees, super El Nino. So for right now, the El Nino signal holding in the Pacific, but we suspect that is going to be very short-lived. The sea surface temperature anomaly history or coverage history. This really tells the story. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. The deeper the oranges, the warmer the temperatures. Back in April, this was a year ago, you could see the first emergence of a Kelvin wave off of Ecuador. Another one building the coverage of warm water steadily expanding over the East Pacific. The official El Nino region starts at 120 west. So you can see back when we were here, it was all off of Ecuador. It hadn't even expanded into the official region. But as we got into about August, warm anomalies steadily building, peaking somewhere here in December. And now you can see the downward trend with temperatures, what is this, 1 or 2 shades of yellow, a half to 1 degree, so barely El Nino, except for maybe here where you're at 1 degree across the main Nino 3.4 region. So what does the atmosphere think is going on? We're going to look at the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, roughly in the Indian Ocean, and Tahiti in the Pacific, South Pacific, but Pacific. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, the index goes negative. Whoa, today minus 13.45. It has been negative here for 5 days or so. What's going on? We're not in the active phase of the MJO. One would think if the active phase of the MJO were moving over Tahiti, well, then the index would be falling. We know that it's east of there. It's south of California, if not even south of Mexico. If you look at the South Pacific pressure charts, there's a local low pressure system basically pushing right over Tahiti, driving the index negative. But if you go back in time, it's been, basically some flavor of positive for a month now. The 30-day average takes the daily noise, like this 5-day little blip thing, out of the numbers. Today, minus 0.38, so basically neutral. Where were we? Well, we were at minus 13 a month ago, so you can see the trend is steadily heading up, dead neutral now. This would maybe suggest that in the atmosphere we're neutral or just weakly El Nino. The 90-day average takes it even further. That's really the El Nino indicator. This is more the active-inactive phase of the MJO. Minus 3.74. Where were we a month ago? Minus 5, so slowly moving from what was barely an El Nino signal to start with in the SOI index, still working our way towards neutral. Here's the 30-day moving SOI graphed out. Here's where we are today, basically dead neutral. During the peak of our El Nino here in 2023, we had some spikes down to 20 and about 15, but I would have thought if this was a strong El Nino, we'd be like pinned down at minus 20 and 25. Instead, we had spurts of normal, just not what you would expect from a quote-unquote strong El Nino. And then back here, of course, was our La Nina period. So you can see the trend. La Nina crashing into El Nino, but El Nino giving up the ghost even when it was supposed to be its strongest back in December and January. And now just weakening from there. Forecast data from the CFS model for the Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies suggesting, there's our peak of El Nino, and we had plus 2 degree anomalies back in December. This solid line is actual, so today plus 1.35 degrees, but you can see here just this steadily falling horrible crash with temperatures down theoretically at minus 2.5 degrees. I mean, I think that's a bit ridiculous. The consensus model suggests, both the statistic and dynamic models suggest this La Nina really only going down to maybe minus 1 degree, something like that, which is not too bad of a La Nina by fall time. And even at that time, the remnants of El Nino will still be circulating in the upper atmosphere, theoretically. We'll see how that all plays out. But the one thing on all these forecasts is we are in the spring unpredictability now, barrier now in April, and we'll continue the whole way through the end of May. The models have a very difficult time as you're in this change of season thing. We're definitely in a springtime pattern now. We see it in the snow data, we see it in the temperatures, and you can just look out your window and everything's green. And so we kind of know we're there. But after we get into June, so we got to get through April and May. We'll be out of the spring unpredictability barrier, and then we'll see really where this developing La Nina is going to go. So the overview for right now, we are in a springtime pattern. Southern Hemi trying to come online, Northern Pacific still trying to play its games, but looking like whatever storm formation is going to happen, it's all around the edges of the Pacific. Strong high pressure just locked down over the central North Pacific. Going to drive that springtime trade wind pattern for the Hawaiian Islands, and hopefully not too bad for California. In the meantime, inactive phase of the MJO, splitting the jet stream, but providing opportunity for more rain into California and snow in the mountains. Rainfall totals up and down the California coast are all at a minimum, completely normal for this time of year. Southern California really getting the lion's share of the rain this year, maybe 130 to 140% of normal. The Bay Area probably doing the worst of any of it, but still right at somewhere between 95 and 100%, maybe another half inch of rain in the rain gauge here at the house, and we'll be at normal. Snow still falling in the Sierra. Snow coverage in the Sierra looking pretty good. I mean, it looks pretty much like a normal year. It started out bad with those high temperatures and mainly rain down at the base at many resorts, but now things looking quite nice. We'll see what happens as these pair of heat waves, not really heat waves, but higher than, pretty much seasonal normal high freeze levels start setting in, and that'll start having an effect on the snowpack and it'll start melting off. Southern Hemi, though, showing some signs of activity. A little gale forecast in the next couple of days in the South Central Pacific, maybe providing potential for what would be, I'd say, maybe the first real, we'll call it modest Southern Hemi swell, reaching up into California and maybe some sideband energy up into Hawaii. Nothing too solid, though. It really depends on what the North Pacific does and wind does and whether the swell is even noticeable or just lost under a bunch of chops. So we'll have to stay tuned to that. Longer term, yes, we're moving to La Nina. Is it going to be a strong La Nina, weak La Nina? We don't know. We'll have to see. Got to get through the spring unpredictability barrier. But for now, we're chugging along. All right, that's the video for this week. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up. We'd appreciate it. If you have comments or questions, write them up down below. If you haven't subscribed, click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. That'll help you get signed up. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the cause, you can. Just hit the special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. And with that, we're done for this week. We will do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.